Right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Kristine Reeves. I have the honor and the privilege of running to be the next Congresswoman from the 10th Congressional District, the South Puget Sound area. And I am excited to be joined this morning by several amazing women, allies and leaders in our community who also happen to be Black. So we're going to share a little Black girl magic with everybody today in celebration of Juneteenth. So I want to welcome first and foremost Representative Debra Entenman, who is currently serving in the Washington State Legislature. I'm just going to read here a little bit about her. State Representative Debra Entenman is a former non-traditional student who's passionate about education for people of all ages and stages of life. That passion stems from her own experiences as well as her family's experiences in pursuing higher education. Representative Entenman went back to school after her own children were ready to enter college. At Highline Community College and Seattle University, she studied political science and went on to serve as the district director for Congressman Adam Smith. She was appointed to the Board of Trustees at Renton Technical College in 2015. We know this is not a comprehensive bio for Representative Entenman, but we're super excited to have you this morning. Next, I want to introduce Representative Melanie Morgan. Representative Morgan is a former school board director from Franklin Pierce Schools. She's a U.S. Army veteran and an active community advocate. In the Washington State House of Representatives, Melanie is a strong voice for underrepresented communities and a staunch advocate for equity in state policies. Having personally experienced homelessness, she understands firsthand the barriers people face in order to meet one's basic needs. She knows that people who struggle the most tend to have the least access to the legislative process, and this has motivated her to run for the Washington State Legislature. She's proud to bring her personal and professional experience to represent and advocate on behalf of the 29th. We are so excited to have her here this morning. Next, I want to introduce two amazing leaders in our labor movement here in Washington State. I'm going to start with Shawnee Wheeler, who, with more than 15 years as a union activist, Shawnee Wheeler James currently works as the political and legislative director for Teamsters Joint Council 28, representing the 12 locals across Washington State, Idaho, and Alaska. Shawnee spends most of her efforts in the wonky world of politics, navigating the complex intersection between campaigns, messaging, and public policy. In this role, she leads the union's state and local legislative and electoral programs. And if you can't tell, she is bringing her own special guest with her this morning, her amazing newest addition to her family. So we're so happy to have you with us, Shawnee, and really appreciate the full frontal momming today. Next, I want to introduce Janie White. Janie is the first education support professional and the first Black woman to be elected to one of WEA's statewide positions. Before her election, she served as the office manager of Nelson Middle School in Renton. She was the Renton ESP president after serving as a building rep and a bargaining team member. And she's a graduate of the NEA ESP Leaders of Tomorrow program, while serving as being active in the Rainier Educators of Color Network. She was WEA's ESP of the Year in 2017, and we are so excited to have you with us this morning, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna just start this discussion by sharing a little bit of history. And my hope is that that will kind of level us or ground us all in the conversation that we are about to have, very specific to how Black women lead in labor and politics. So I'm just gonna read a little bit of background for everybody's knowledge, and then we'll get started. So I'll start by sharing, before the Civil War began, African Americans had only been able to vote in a few northern states, and there were virtually no Black office holders. The months after the Union victory in April 1865 saw extensive mobilization within the Black community, with meetings, parades, and petitions calling for legal and political rights, including the all-important right to vote. During the first 2 years of Reconstruction, Blacks organized equal rights leagues throughout the South and held state and local conventions to protest discriminatory treatment and demand suffrage, as well as equality before the law. These African-American activists bitterly opposed the Reconstruction policies of President Andrew Johnson, which excluded Blacks from Southern politics and allowed state legislatures to pass restrictive Black codes, regulating the lives of the free men and women. Fierce resistance to these discriminatory laws, as well as growing opposition to Johnson's policy in the North, led to a Republican victory in the U.S. congressional elections of 1866, and to a new phase of Reconstruction that would give African Americans a more active role in the political, economic, and social life of the South. During the decade known as Radical Reconstruction, that would have been from 1867 to 1877, Congress granted African American men the status and rights of citizenship, including the right to vote as guaranteed by the 14th and 15th Amendments of the Constitution. Beginning in 1907, branches of the Union League, which encouraged the political activism of African Americans, spread throughout the South. During the state constitutional conventions, Blacks and white Americans stood side by side for the first time in political life. And we are definitely seeing that today in the work that we are doing to encourage, again, representation in government, in leadership, and in labor. And so now I'll share a little bit about the labor movement. You all may be surprised to know that the Washerwomen of Jackson formed Mississippi's first labor union in 1866. Persons, who was an anarchist and a firebrand, co-founded three influential radical unions in 20th century Chicago. More recently, United Auto Workers organizer, and I apologize, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Sanchione Butler, battled Nissan in a years-long campaign to organize Southern auto plant workers. Along with so many others, these Black women have long been the bedrock of a workers' rights movement that has often tried to shut them out. Prior to desegregation, many white-led unions refused to admit Black members of any gender, and Black women faced the intersectional double bind of gender bias and racial discrimination. When faced with a locked union hall door, however, many Black women labor leaders decided to take matters into their own hands, and they formed their own unions within the industries in which they had the highest numbers and therefore held the most power. So as you can see, y'all, this is not a new conversation, even here in this Washington, let alone across our country. Black women have been leading in the Reconstruction movement, in the labor movement, and working to ensure that in all facets of our society, folks are represented. I'll share, if you don't know this little tidbit, our first Black elected official here in Washington State was a gentleman by the name of William Owen Bush, who served in Thurston County, so part of the 10th District, and actually served in the first legislature in 1889. So we know that Black people and Black women in particular have been leading in our country for generations. And I look forward to the opportunity to have the conversation this morning with all of you and with our esteemed panel about what it means to be a Black woman in leading in labor and politics today, and why today is such an important day for African Americans and for Black people across this country. So I'll start, and obviously Janie, Representative Entenman, Representative Morgan, or Shawnee, any of you are free to start with this question. But can you share just a little bit from your perspective what today means for you personally or for your family? And do you have any traditions that you use to mark today?
Well, I'll start. Today for me is just to give respect and honor for our ancestors that fought so much for us, and they are so resilient and they've gone through so much. This is a celebration for us to appreciate our Black folks, our ancestors. We should be here having this as a national holiday. There shouldn't be an actual day for work. The saddest part about being here is that the majority of our Black folks are the ones that are working today, opposed to having the day off to celebrate and give tribute and respect to this day. This is a day that we endured, and our families had to go through, our ancestors had to go through some corrupt, vile suffering, and they had to endure so much just for us to live today, for us to be sitting here today. And no, I do not celebrate as much as I want for this, because honestly, I'm from Washington, and Washington is known for not telling the true history of our Black folks, and we need to change that. My children are amazing. They spend more of their time with us having chat and storytelling during this time, but it needs to be more. So I need to work on that myself.
I'll piggyback.
Shaking your head. Yeah, go for it, Shani.
Yeah. So when I saw that question, I was like, I don't celebrate that. Until I was an adult, I didn't even know what it was, honestly. Like most Americans, we celebrate the 4th of July, right? That's what the education system has taught us. And I called around to folks. I called Janie. I was like, do you celebrate this? Holiday for Shrika, you guys celebrate this? Is it just me? But resoundingly, no. A lot of folks in our community don't know or aren't educated about it. So for me, what it meant then was it's a time to further the conversation about what the legacy of slavery has meant to our communities, the work that continues to be done, that needs to still be done in our marginalized communities, because if we're being honest, we don't have the same liberties, even in 2020. And when Janie was talking about our ancestors, slavery wasn't that long ago. I mean, when we're talking ancestral, my great-grandfather lived on a plantation. That's not that long ago, right? He passed away only a few years ago at 90. So we're not talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So this is still an effect that impacts our community to this day. And until we address those systemic issues, we have a lot more work to do. And I want to celebrate that landmark, yes, but let's continue that work.
So I have to honestly say that I did not and have not participated in a Juneteenth celebration. I was born here in the Pacific Northwest. I am 58 years old. I knew about Emancipation Day, but I also knew the history of my family. I can trace, my grandmother lived to be 101.
Beautiful.
And she passed away in the Pacific Northwest in 2005. She had the opportunity to learn how to read and to write and to be an educated person. She actually attended normal school. So I am from generations of educated people. I know that the plantation in which she was born was called Belle Alliance. I have been there. I was there in 2016 because my cousin and I decided to take the trek. It is in Metairie, Louisiana. There is a celebration of ancestors in our family, which we do in New Orleans, because as you may or may not know, New Orleans is a very interesting place where graveyards are in neighborhoods. You work very hard to be buried near where your family lives so that they can visit you. And so when we would go to New Orleans, we would go and visit our ancestors. It was just something we did as soon as we would get into town. I think about Juneteenth now, and it is a wonderful, wonderful expression of who we are, not only who we are as African Americans, but who we are as Americans. We need to know about Juneteenth. You need to know about Juneteenth, because we need to be honest about the history of this country so that we can move forward. We have to first have that truth before we can have the reconciliation, before we can move forward. And I am excited to see what is happening in our communities. Some of it makes all of us uncomfortable, but we should be uncomfortable because that is where change and growth happens.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much sharing the same story as all the other panelists. I grew up in the military overseas. I never heard of Juneteenth, much less any of the Black African American history that was happening in the United States in the 70s and the 80s. We were extremely shielded. It wasn't until I came back to the States in my 20s that I heard of Juneteenth, but I never knew exactly what it was. I knew it was connected to African Americans, but never knew the explanation of what it actually was. Never been to a celebration, never seen a celebration. And not even in the communities that I'm in when I moved to Washington was Juneteenth even spoken. It was almost like it was some special, hidden, blah, blah, not really giving any credit on anything there. This is a very bittersweet day for me. And the reason that is because I tried to pass legislation last session making Juneteenth a state holiday. And I was told it was too expensive. So I guess our lives and our celebration is too expensive. But I'm sure that when I go back this session, they were no doubt pass this legislation for Juneteenth, granted if the federal government doesn't do it first. But it is an important day, and it's our July 4th, really, that's what it is. But the reality is this is only a celebration that we were released from slavery, because we do not have our freedom yet as we see today. We're still fighting for our freedom. This is not a freedom celebration to me. It's a release, the day you took the shackles off of my feet and my hands and my mouth. But the reality is we have a long way to go to really educate about Juneteenth and what Black and African American slaves went through to get to this day. It's really about that. It's about what do we do next now? This is a great opportunity for us to talk about how do we make Juneteenth a national, a state, a regular thing that we talk about, but understanding why. Lots of people love to celebrate things but don't understand why. Everybody knows why we celebrate July 4th. Everybody knows that. So therefore, we got to get the same way with this, because this is truly should be just as equal with that. This is in the fabric of the United States creation, and therefore we're going to need to celebrate it. So if anyone is feeling some kind of way or guilty or whatever, it's time to put that away. It's not about that. It is about, thank you for doing the right thing and voting for us to be free. Now let's all celebrate this inclusively to say freedom, because we do that for July 4th, and I would like to see the same thing for Juneteenth.
Well, and that is a great segue, Representative Morgan, to this next question. I think, obviously, you all are leading in this moment. We are all leading in this moment of both a global pandemic and the pandemic of addressing our country's rich and intersectional history with racism. And so, obviously only in so much as you're comfortable, because I know, trust me, as a woman of color myself, always being asked to educate folks can get really tiring. But in so much as you're comfortable, I'd love to kind of hear from you all what it's like to lead in this moment, what it's like, particularly for those of you who had parents in the movement in the 60s. What's it like to lead right now, particularly as a woman of color or as a Black woman?
You want me to go first again?
Sure, whoever wants to jump in.
I'm gonna have to be a little raw with you. It's tough. We have to be vulnerable. We have to be unapologetic. We have to go through some pain, and we have to endure. This is a tough time being a Black woman, a woman of color during this time, because you have to also be diplomatic. You have to go through the process, but you're going through two processes. You're going through the process of the position you hold and the process of the skin you're in. And so when you go through this struggle, you have to educate, you have to be unapologetic, you have to sometimes be raw, and you have to, more importantly, teach while you're going through all of that. And it's a struggle, because let's be honest, every time something happens with our Black and brown brothers and sisters, they go find us. They may not find us for anything else at the table, but they'll find you to ask you a question about Black or brown when something's happening. So it's tough, but it's an honor. Don't misunderstand. During this time, this is the time we are fortunate that we're on the platform, so we're able to speak, and we haven't had that opportunity to have a seat at the table. So when you're there, we have to speak. We have to speak up, and So it's a tough time. I'm going through some stuff. I have to honestly tell you, this is really tough because every time we see a murder, every time we see pain, this is not the first time. I mean, you're talking about Juneteenth. This is history of continually trying to express that we're human. We have to fight every day to say that we deserve to be recognized. And shame on all of the racist people out there that believe that they have the right to determine if I should breathe or not.
Ah. So for me, it's been a little frustrating. I share with Jeannie as well, and I'm sure all of us share, everyone calling and texting, sending love and etc. But where were you yesterday when I needed all that? Because this issue didn't just appear overnight. I've been struggling and suffering with the same issues that we all want to get behind today. I was suffering with those yesterday. I had tears yesterday. I was shouting from the mountaintops yesterday, and nobody was hearing me. It was falling on deaf ears. Like I said, my bill did not pass. So we weren't seeing the importance, the significance of what I was saying and why I was trying to bring legislation. It almost left, I'm speechless at times. I've been very quiet in my job because I just don't know what else to say. I've been saying it all along, and everybody wants to know what to do and what's the solution. Freedom. The solution is freedom. Give me my freedom. So I don't know what else. I don't know what else they want, but I am concerned, and I'm concerned about this. If any of you have noticed, when the news first started reporting the protesting, they interviewed Black people and only Black people, and they filmed Black people. But as I'm watching the news now, they're interviewing white people, and they're showing white people. And this is the problem that I have. Every time that we are doing something for us, we love our allies. This is not to say we don't love our allies. We need our allies. We want to be inclusive. But you know what? Right now, it's my day. It's my day today. So I'm asking my allies, get in the back. Let me lead this. Let me lead this movement. Let me lead my people. Let me lead my issues. Thank you so much to all the allies that were there when I couldn't be there. But I'm here now. But I know it's hard for people to say, okay, now it's over. I need to let this person have this space. I know, I'm a mother. It's the same thing, and all my children are grown. So I have to stop parenting them as a little child, right? Now they're adult children. So I don't have to be meddling in their lives. It is the same exact way we as Black people are asking. We would like to accomplish things and let us be the lead. Why? Because it's my life. You cannot advocate for a life that you have never lived. If you haven't lived my life, you can't truly advocate. But what we do need is for you to stand behind me and help me. Tell your friends, this is what she needs. We have got to get on board and help her to get this, because whatever she's asking for, she's not asking for it in her name. She's asking for it for all the Black African American people across the globe, not just in this country. We fight for all of our brothers and sisters. You can tell I'm a bit hyped on it.
Representative Entenman, Janie, either of you guys want to lean in on that one, or Representative Entenman?
Please be unmuted.
Yeah, I think you got, for some reason it's not unmuting on it. There you go.
There you go. Sorry about that. So first of all, thank you, Melanie. I appreciate your words. I appreciate your passion. And it has been an amazing time. I literally have been having people say to me and do things for me that it's just been, I am amazed. It has not always been positive. It has not always been affirming. It has been a challenge. My work in the legislature is going to work every day armed with knowledge and teaching people things that I thought most people knew, and
Right.
I was wrong.
Yep.
And so it is, so to be in this position of being new to the legislature, trying to learn the legislative processes. I mean, I'm a political science major, but being in the legislature and being a political science major, two different things, because you have to learn the process of how people work together to get things done. It is very transactional. It is not something that I am used to. I am more of a collaborator. And so it is, it has been a learning experience. So when we get into the space now where people are asking us to lead and asking what we think about something, and then want to champion the things that we think are important, it's a little different. And so the work that I have been trying to do for me, because I have to do work for me, this is hard. People are asking us to do things to open ourselves up. We have to take care of ourselves, because we will be dead and folks will still be out here doing whatever it is that they want to do when they think this is over. This is not a moment. This is a movement. This is going to take a lot of time and effort. And for those of us who are running for office, like Kristine, we are going to need your financial support to get us where we need to be. But we are also going to have you to open up your heart, not just your ears. And we are going to need you to close your mouths. When I was a child, my grandmother used to say, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Because I just thought I knew everything. I could read when I was 4 years old. So, once you could read, nobody could tell me anything. So, and so as we move forward, because this is all about moving forward, this is our time of truth where we need you to listen. Then we have our time of reconciliation. But this is our time of truth, and now it is time for people to listen.
For me, obviously, as a union rep, the beginning of the pandemic was work, 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 work. We have so many essential workers on the front line. And so it was just around the clock Zoom calls, around the clock shop visits, figuring out, what phase are we in next? Watching Governor Inslee constantly on, what are the parameters? What are the protocol for my workers to stay safe out there in the field? And it went from that to then getting some normalcy within a quarantine life, right? I was spending more time with my kids. It was nice. You have a senior this year graduating, looking at the future, baking bread at home, which I've never done in my life, to then putting on my marching boots and going into the streets, right? It was 2 different dichotomies of who I am as a Black woman in the labor movement. And it's very perplexing. I echo a lot of the sentiments given by my fellow sisters, that I've gotten tons of phone calls on, how do we fix this, Janie? How do we fix this, Janie? And I was insulted. I really was in the beginning. In the beginning, I was really insulted. And then my husband had to sit me down and say, these are men of privilege. They're not used to this. It's very uncomfortable for them. And not only can they listen to you, but they hear you. There's a difference. And if they're willing to hear you, you need to speak. And this will cause change. And so I had to sit back and internalize that for a moment, and still, of course, keeping my mental health intact, right? Because we have to continue to fight another day. I think the sentiment that Black women are resilient can often be a crutch to us. And we're looked at as superheroes when we're just human too. So in between Zoom meetings, just like everybody else, I break down, I cry, I pull myself together and we continue this work. But I think these uncomfortable conversations are needed. It kind of reminds me of when I was younger and I fractured my leg and around my ankle. The doctor had to literally go in and break it in order for me to heal. And that's what I feel like we're at right now. It must be broken for us to be able to be truly healed and start a system that is equitable for everybody. And so I know you guys are uncomfortable, but buckle up, enjoy the ride, because we have a long ways to go.
Well, and I think that's a great segue. So thank you for sharing that vulnerability, Shawnee, because I think you're right. All too often, particularly Black women are expected to be superheroes, and especially when we're in leadership. And so one of the questions, and I know you all obviously have heard me say this a lot, but maybe not everybody on this call, but particularly as we read that history earlier in this call, earlier in this panel, you know, I often say we are operating in institutions that were not built for us, by us, or with our inclusion in mind. And so as we think about the moment that we are living in, I think, you know, so many people, obviously we're super excited, are coming to realize that this is a systemic problem. This is something we all have known for generations, right? One of the stories I tell is that my grandmother was a white woman from Idaho. My grandfather was a Black man whose family came out of slavery in the South. They fell in love before the Civil Rights Act, before marriage was legal interracially, and obviously dealt with all of those challenges. But tell me stories about how raising their kids, they dealt with the KKK burning down my grandfather's restaurant, that they dealt with the fact that my grandmother could not rent an apartment if her mixed race children were with her. So as we wrestle with our history, and we're introducing so many new allies to the fact that this is not new for a lot of us, how do you all see your role moving forward in this work? One, I think to Representative Entenman's point, you got to take care of yourself. But to Shawnee's point, folks are asking us to lead, some of it authentically, some of it performatory. But how do you find that path forward in this moment to keep pushing the rock up the hill?
I'll go first this time. It's the reality is, the question is really, we're not going to do anything new. We're going to continue the work that we've been doing. We're going to continue the fight. I'm going to continue to introduce civil rights legislation to bring that to some form of balance. We're going to continue talking to people. We're going to continue to answer questions. We're going to continue to be on the front line. And sorry, but we do be putting on that cape sometimes, Shawnee, and acting as the superhero, because you know what the reality is, Shawnee, we are superheroes in our own right. Because I'm gonna tell you what, you see a lot of protesters out there today. You give it a couple of days, everybody's gonna disperse. It's especially when we go back to work, because that's what we have to do. As you said, Shawnee, we're essential workers. But the reality is, we're needed. We're needed to keep the fire burning, to keep stoking it, to keep pushing it, to keep the conversation alive. This is America. We are a land of opportunity. We are a land of innovative ideas, and we invent so many things. If we don't keep this fire burning, it will go away. Just like Occupy 99, when that was a big thing and we were protesting across the nation. We don't even remember Occupy 99 anymore. And we do not want this movement to be that. So I think it's the same thing. For me, there's not a change. It's to keep fighting. But of course, to Representative Entenman's point, we do have to take care of ourselves. And it's extremely difficult to take care of ourselves in this position, because everybody is grabbing at you for do this, do that, lead this, lead that. And it's like, no, no, and no, because I'm already doing the 11 things on the list that you gave me last year. So, we haven't gotten through with even a small percentage of that list. There's so much to be done for our people. And I think the best thing that our white allies can do for us, I can't express it enough, is to get behind us and helping us as we lead it, as we lead the march.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Janie.
go first. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to highlight, and I think this is something that Representative Morgan expressed for me in the legislature as a member, that I think a couple of folks in the chat are also expressing, is that to be mindful that the lived experience of African Americans is not uniform across our country. That just because you are Black does not mean that you have all had the same Black experience. Much like we would say to our white allies, just because you're white doesn't mean you've all had the same lived experience. And so Representative Morgan and, you know, Janie, feel free to jump off from this point, but just can you talk a little bit about that, as obviously we're seeing a lot of passion this morning about what needs to happen, recognizing that those are different, based on different experiences by different leaders in the movement. And what you all need in labor may be different than what folks in the legislature need. But can you speak a little bit to just kind of the difference in Black lived experience in our country and how that's impacting the larger conversation?
Was that for me? Or for Janie?
I didn't mean to interrupt Janie, but I think it was just popping up the point that recognizing one of the things you said to me in the legislature when we were founding the Black Members Caucus was initially I said, oh, we're going to have the African American Legislators Caucus, and Melanie said to me, but we're not all African American. You're Jamaican American, right? But that we all are Black-skinned people, right? And so I think, as you just pointed out in that moment, we don't all share the same lived experience as Black people in this country. And so as you're talking about letting us lead, recognizing that that experience may be very different for Black women in labor than it is for Black women in politics, or maybe the exact same, I don't know. But I thought, I just caught on that and thought it would be an interesting divergence.
And I think it doesn't even matter about what your passion, your career is. It's about being Black. This country loves quick solutions. And if you'll notice, the government loves to create things that provides a solution for many. But equity is one size does not fit all. So when we were creating the Black Members Caucus, it was about, we had 5 Black legislators. And so we love to be monolithic. And I was intentional about, we are 5 different Black members. And I wanted each of us to bring that rich experience of your lived life, your leadership, and how you did it as a Black person, not what I did, and now everybody's got to fall in line and be on top of Morgan and do it the way we did it. And I think it was beautiful because it really started teaching our white allies that there's more than one way to be Black. You know, I probably am more on the high side for our group down at the legislature, but it's important that we move forward with getting rid of the idea that we've been conditioned with, that all Black people act one way. And the sad part of it is, I challenge our white allies, like, how many Black homes have you been into? How many Black friends do you actually have? If you only have one, then you only get to see one perspective. And then you start thinking, well, all people act like this one friend. Your white friends don't all act the same. So therefore, we should be given the same respect to spread us out, that we have different experiences and capabilities that are beautiful and rich and that add to any type of leadership that we are bringing forward. So, you're right, Kristine, it is extremely important. It's actually offensive, right, Representative Entenman? When Representative Entenman and I first got down to the legislature, they couldn't distinguish between the two of us. I was called Representative Entenman for the whole session. We were profiled in the parking lot, like we weren't supposed to be there. So we have been through a lot of things to kind of establish that not all Black people are thugs and not all Black people are this or that. I'm just me, Melanie Morgan, with this skin and what I came to. And to actually say that I'm Entenman is disrespectful, because now you're taking my life away. you're diminishing me and who I am. So we have to be careful with making sure that you give me the credit that is due. My name is Representative Morgan, not Melanie Morgan, because my white counterparts, you call them by their title, but I don't get called by my title. It's demeaning. So it's demeaning when you don't, to bring it all back around, when we're not given the credit of being different people. That's what equity is. And we would like to be different, and the richness of being inclusive makes us stronger as a nation.
Yes. So,
Yes, I have to say, I just want the most interesting aspect of being in the legislature is on the days that Melanie or I spoke on the floor, we would often be complimented for our speeches that we didn't give. So when I would give a speech, she would get a compliment, and when she would give a speech, I would get a compliment. Now, on a good day, I'm 5 feet tall.
I was gonna say.
And Melanie is closer to 6 feet tall.
I'm 5'7", girl, quit.
Okay. But there's such a difference between, I mean, you can look at us right now and see Melanie sits in the very last row almost on the floor, and I sit in the very first row on the floor. So even if you think somehow we look alike, we don't even sit near each other in the legislature. So it was always amazing to me when people would compliment me on Melanie's speeches and call me Representative Morgan. We actually posted a picture talking about being twins because we had been called by each other's names so often. Now, we know that today they call that a microaggression. We call it giving shade because they knew who we were. That was just about trying to keep us in our place by trying to say,
yes.
Oh, that was just about trying to keep us in our place. We knew who we were. Today, that's a microaggression. In our community, it's giving shade, but we see you. We know what happened. And those are the sorts of things that we experienced when we were in the legislature. And so it is really important for people to understand that our work and our lives are challenging. We are doing two things at once. Most of the time, people go to their job and can just do their work because that's what they were hired to do. That's what they were elected to do. For African American women specifically, because I can't speak as a man, for African American women, we have to go to our job and do our work to perfection, and educate white people.
And don't forget, we have to assimilate with our hair. And that's why I passed the hair discrimination bill.
Thank you.
So all of it is, there are so many layers of things we're doing when we are just in a space that people don't take into consideration. So just remember, it's more than just what you see on the surface. There are deep layers of things that we are experiencing and going through. And often people talk about Black girl magic. And there are times when I think that that's a compliment, and there are times when I think that that is a cop-out. Because if you think I'm magic,
right,
then you don't have to do what you need to do. And so there are times when I find it's a compliment. The way that we can take a piece of cloth, wrap it on our head, and go on out and do our business, because this is simply a piece of cloth wrapped on my head. Compliments. I get more compliments when I put this on, and I am very excited about it. No, it's not a hat. It's a piece of cloth that I have wrapped up to be on my head this morning. And so we can make as my grandmother again would say, we can make a way out of no way. We know how to do that because that is what we have had to do to survive. I want to get to the living now. I'm tired of being in the survival mode.
Yes.
I want to get to the living.
Yes.
Well, and so to that end, I'm going to lean as we get close to the end here. I don't think it'll shock any of you to know that we've got about 15 minutes left, and you have spurred an amazing dialogue in the chat room here with lots of great questions and lots of requests to keep having this dialogue moving forward. So I want to use the little bit of time that we have left, because I think to your point, Representative Entenman, how do we move forward? How do we get to the living? And one of the questions that got asked in the chat room was, during this time of dealing with both a pandemic and the public fight for racial equity, one of the most striking differences nationally is how differently the Black community has dealt with collective action during a pandemic versus mostly white people who are protesting shutdowns / mask requirements. As leaders / organizers in the Black community, what lessons do you all have around organizing people to get to the place where caring for our community's health isn't a freedom issue, but a way of actually enhancing the freedom that we already have?
I'd like to take that because I've had this discussion with folks on the Health Disparities Committee. I want to say this clearly so folks understand. People who don't want to wear masks, it is not about freedom. It is about racism. Our president has signaled that African American people and Hispanic people are the people, not the people like us, who are getting coronavirus. So there are many white people who think they don't have to wear a mask, especially young white men, because they're not going to get it. Old white people, Black people, and brown people are going to get it. The rest of them are not. We need to make masks a requirement. It is not up to Black people to get other people to wear masks. It is now up to the government to get other people to wear masks. If Costco can make wearing a mask mandatory and put folks out of Costco, so can Lowe's, and so can folks who run Kroger's, and so can people who have businesses. If you have a liquor license and you're not requiring your staff and your clientele to wear a mask, then you lose your liquor license. We need to put some emphasis on where the emphasis should be. It is not about me to educate other people about wearing a mask. It is now mandatory because COVID is real, because people are dying, because we have inequities in our healthcare system that disproportionately impact Black people and Hispanic people and older white people. But at the end of the day, we need to have a mandate for the masks, because if we can have a sign that says no shoes, no shirt, no service, we can have a sign that says no shoes, no mask, no shirt, no service. Add the mask, wear the mask, require it.
Anybody else want to jump on that one?
I can talk about it from a labor perspective. We have been working closely and having roundtables with the governor's office on what's required to safely stay employed, stay working, or how do we move forward in our next upcoming 3 phases. And it's been really interesting because in the beginning, most of our essential workers, as it's not, obviously it's common knowledge, they're Black and brown folks. And it's funny that they went from replaceable to now essential. And it's been really challenging that now that we're opening up, I think Pierce County's in phase 2, we're in 1.5, that many employers are like, okay, let's business as usual. Let's get back to making money. And we're like, no, our people are still need to be safe. And so they're looking at these as cost analysis instead of looking at it as human rights. And it's such a privileged perspective. And I think it highlights and showcases the need for organized labor. I for many years I heard, we don't need unions anymore. Everybody's fine. Policies are in place. Employers are doing the right thing. And I think this pandemic has showcased that that's not true, and that we are more relevant, if not more relevant than before. And like I said, we've been working, I know Janie and I working around the clock. I work more now than I ever have before. I have 28 hours in a day, it seems like. But it definitely, for me, it makes me proud of the work that we're doing because we are keeping our community safe. Grocery store workers were not able to get masks. You would think something so small and minute, but they've done it. And the only reason that they've done these is because organized labor has come in and said, no. So not only are we keeping our workers safe, but we're keeping our community safe.
And the real truth about it is that our lives matter. And we talk about the essential workers. When we're dealing with our students, when we're dealing with our education support professionals, which is our essential workers in most of our education piece, we are dealing with people's lives. And we are trying to say, well, you know what? We need to get back and start making money. So let's just forget about them and get back to work. And we need to start thinking about how to wear that protection that we saw on the screen. Thank you, Carol, I saw it. For making sure that we are keeping all of us safe. And we are, like Shawnee said, putting in a lot of work to make sure that, I mean, it's scary to hear that people are like, oh, COVID, it's over now, let's move on. And that's not the truth. And so we need to keep educating our people about the safety and the health. And we need to start wearing that protective gear to make sure that we're all staying safe. And not just because you feel you shouldn't wear it, that it's okay, because you're putting all of us, all of our lives in danger because of that.
All right, well, with just a few minutes left, I'm just gonna go ahead and close us out this morning. You've got a lot of questions in the chat box about what folks can do to be helpful. And so since I know you all can't make this ask, but I can, what I will tell you is that one of the first things you can do is support Black women running for office. You have amazing women on this panel. I'll just speak to the two that I got to serve in the legislature with. I was the first African-American woman elected to the House in to the legislature in 18 years. And then the next election cycle, we got to be joined by Representative Entenman and Representative Morgan. And this year, if I remember the number correctly, there are 6 more African-American women running for the state house and the Senate in our state. So one of the first things y'all can do is, if you believe that representation matters, if you believe that bringing a different lived experience and perspective to the work that we need to accomplish, not only in pushing progressive priorities forward, but making sure that we have folks who are going to focus on dismantling the brick walls and the barriers in these institutions that weren't built for us, by us, or with our inclusion in mind, then I highly encourage you to check out these elected leaders' websites, get to know them better. And if you can, I know it's a tough time for everybody, but pitch in $5, $10, $25 to help make sure that we give these folks a seat at the table to lead the charge. The other thing I would ask is, particularly for our labor leaders, none of us, Representative Entenman, Representative Morgan, or myself, would be in the legislature were it not for the support of our labor family. And so I would just tell you that if you have the opportunity to participate in supporting labor unions, whether it's not crossing picket lines, whether it's making sure that we're contributing to the dialogue, fighting for collective bargaining rights, I would encourage you all to connect with these fantastic ladies on this call and get to know a little bit more about what's happening in the labor movement right now, particularly as we stand in support of Black Lives Matter in our state and our country. Grateful to all of you. I'm excited to have found out, sadly, that this Zoom was capped at 100 people. Didn't know that, have never had to use that. And we, for the last hour, have had folks cycling in and out trying to get into this call, because we have maintained 100 viewers for the whole time we've been on this morning. And that's only possible because you all were willing to join us and engage in this dialogue. We've been asked by several folks in the chat box to do this again. I'll check in with our panelists and see if we can't continue the conversation at a future Coffee with Kristine. But we host them every Friday from 8 to 9 o'clock. We are talking about issues that matter most to you and your family and the strength of our communities. We encourage you to join us every Friday. Thank you guys so much for being here today.